We're live!
We made it.
Yes. So awesome to have you on my channel, Chris. It's such an honor.
Oh, stoked to be here. Thanks so much
And
for having me on.
yeah, thank you so much for coming. And yeah, today we have a super exciting topic. One of the few chapters of your brand new book, Raw Truth, which I'm almost done reading.
Oh,
And yeah, super excited topic, cooked food. So we're going to talk about the pros and cons of cooked foods and whether it's something to incorporate. So first of all, I wanted to ask you because I think if I'm correct, you've been more raw for more than 20 years now, right?
yeah. I'm celebrating my 21st year as a raw foodist. Basically, right around now. I wish I knew the exact date, but I don't know the exact date. But I know it's the spring of 2024 or 2004 that I went raw.
Wow, that is amazing. And yeah, how do you feel?
I feel good. I mean, I'm a little bit tired because I've been up, burning the candle at both ends and, doing lots of lives, which sometimes, takes a little bit of brain power and haven't been sleeping quite as good as I could. And it was pretty hectic, I'll admit, the last couple months before the bundle, just behind the scenes, creating that book and also just managing the back end of the bundle and stuff. But I'm doing very well overall for sure. How about you?
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm feeling really good as well. I think it's a challenging time for a lot of people, like a lot of stuff happening right now. And I feel like the raw food lifestyle is definitely something that I'm so grateful to be having every single day because it really helps me so much to be able to handle and juggle all these different things in life. So
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you right off the bat because you do have this chapter about cooked food and how it actually isn't poison. So what would you say are the benefits of still, because if I'm correct, you eat quite like straight, you're quite straight with it, like fully raw and no exceptions. So what would you say is the benefit of doing that?
Well, it really depends. It's all relative to the individual and where they're at physically, mentally, emotionally, what their long-term goals are, as well as what their short-term vision of what fits for them based on their circumstances in their life. And I have had periods of times where I was strict in the sense that if I would have fall off the path of raw food, I would have thought of myself as a failure, and I would have thought myself as like bad and worse than I was, and in the beginning, I really equated success with staying 100% raw and genuinely felt like if I slipped, my whole life was a failure. Like I really felt that in my bones. And I like, when I did slip off, I hated myself. Like I genuinely hated myself and thought I was a complete loser and was embarrassed by myself and didn't want to share it. And some of those slips I didn't like speak aloud to anyone for years because I just held it down in myself and felt really bad about it. Um, these days, I say I'm 100% raw 99% of the time or 99% raw 100% of the time. It may fluctuate a little bit because I do include things like frozen peas, which are technically blanched, unless you get really fresh ones and freeze them yourself. I use spices, which I have no idea the temperature they're dehydrated at, stuff like that. Um, what else? I mean, I've gone to potlucks or raw food events or raw restaurants where you don't know for sure all the ingredients. Some things that people think are raw, maybe they aren't. So, for the absolute most part, I eat a 100% raw food diet. But if something slipped past my lips, I wouldn't be too upset. In the past 5 years out here with my Sambo Camilla in Sweden, I've had more bites of cooked food than I did the previous 15 years as a raw foodist when she, as a vegan chef, was like, "This is amazing," and I allowed myself to have a bite if I genuinely wanted it. But if I didn't, then I said no, which was 99% of the time. And truthfully, that was actually in the first 3 years I was out here. The last 2 years, I've had like maybe one or two bites of something she made, but that's about it. Um, but with 100% raw and strict 100% raw, I just feel my absolute best. You feel the brightest, you feel the clearest, you feel the sharpest, you feel the most energy. It doesn't feel like a roller coaster, and that's why I maintain that because I've noticed through the 21 years in my past, if I did deviate, if I tried something, generally speaking, I noticed that dip, a little bit of a preoccupation, and even if I don't beat myself up with guilt or have shame or negative thoughts around it, it does affect me physically, mentally, emotionally. But it affects you way more if you have guilt, shame, or judgment around it.
Yeah, I think that last point that you mentioned was so key, like that guilt and shame. And I think
Mhm.
absolutely necessary to release that if you wanna, whether you wanna be high raw or fully raw,
Hmm.
to not have these not so positive emotions attached around it.
Yeah.
So, what would you say would be some benefits of if someone decided, hey, I want to do high raw, I want to incorporate some cooked foods because, as we have learned in your book, they aren't really poison. It is not that black and white. There's more differentiation, which we can get into a little bit later. But I
Hmm.
wanted to ask you, what would you say are some benefits of saying, hey, I'm flexible with this. I don't really mind, slipping up here and there, or I wouldn't even call it a slip up because this is part of how I eat.
Mhm. Yeah, if it becomes a conscious choice, it's much different than looking at it as a fall off the wagon, for example. And I do want to add a little bit of clarity. I know we'll go into that a little bit later, but I mean, everything is relative. Comparing steamed greens to chimichangas from the fast food joint is very different. Is very different, right? And we can go much more into that. Um, but benefits, I mean, it again, it really depends on the person and their goals and the situation. But some things, for some people in some places, it can, be beneficial in terms of variety if they just have really poor quality or very little variety where they're at. In some cases, it can be less expensive. Sometimes for social stuff like that, it can be convenient. Sometimes it can make it easier for some people to get more calories. But this chapter and this call too, I just want to, make clear to people here, like I'm a champion of raw food. I'm not trying to promote cooked food necessarily, but I'm trying to lessen the black and white demonization of it that labels all cooked food as evil, bad, make you feel guilty and shameful or toxic. Because there is a lot of information out there and people promoting that, like, if you have one bite of cooked food, then you're less than, or you're going to cause mucoid plaque, or you can never reach heights of health if you include any amount of cooked food ever, and like that kind of black and white mentality can really send people spiraling, and it can really send people into guilt, shame, and just feeling worse about themselves. When in reality, this is a journey. Most people take 5 to 7 years on a raw lifestyle before they gain that consistency and have the mental, emotional, social fortitude to do it without stress and without ups and downs. And some people will stay raw at any cost, like eating really high, super high fat, like jars of nut butter and stuff like that. And in my opinion, it would be much more healthy, not only physically, but mentally, emotionally, to be okay with something like a steamed vegetable or, in an extreme circumstance, oh my gosh, a potato, like it's just a lot easier on people as they're transitioning, or if they decide, that's where they feel comfortable with, which is totally okay too. It's not like everyone has to be a raw foodist. I'm a raw foodist and I promote it because it's amazing. There's so many benefits and it resonates on every single level, but it doesn't have to be a success or failure kind of situation.
Wow. Yeah, that was so beautifully said. Thank you for sharing. And what would you say would be some things that someone can take into consideration to find out whether it's the right path for them to go fully raw or not? Like, what would you say are, you already mentioned a little bit like the cost of living and where you are at located,
Yeah.
but yeah, what would you say are some things?
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is, like, I've traveled the world. I've been all over the place. I mean, I can't say everywhere, but I've been a lot of places. And I've never found a situation myself where I had to compromise, like there was opportunity to and there was choice to, but I've never felt that I had to. But, that can be different for different people based on, their emotional state, based again on their finances, um, based on their comfortability with being really clear with who they are and what they want and not really succumbing to peer pressure and stuff like that. I think all those things can really come into play as well. But it is kind of tough because, like, I'd want to say to some degree, like, I hesitate to say, but I'd want to say to some degree, if somebody is extremely emotional and going through an incredibly tough time, it may not be the best time to try and stick to 100% raw at all costs. Like, in some ways it's supportive and it can be very helpful. especially if you've already gained some level of confident or competence and consistence with the raw food diet. So you already know how to apply it. You've gone through some of the social emotional stuff. You've developed some new coping techniques, right? But if you're brand new to it and then you're like, you come in with 100% raw or I'm a failure, again, then that's going to be much more likely to actually make life harder for you because the reality of a raw food diet is it brings up more emotions. You feel it even more intensely. And if you haven't already developed those coping mechanisms, if you don't have a good base of knowledge or support or just you've done it so you actually have some level of experience with it, that can be really challenging, and so that again kind of goes back to if somebody's in transition, if someone's going through a really tough time, if they're in a circumstance, whether it's financially or physically living with people that are always eating things around them or those kinds of things, in those situations, it can be beneficial to be a little softer on yourself, right? And have a finger pointing towards where you want to go, but also have a little bit of softness in recognizing that again, it's going to be better for your health physically, mentally, emotionally to have some B level or yellow light foods that are still on the table as options if you really need them, or if you feel called to them, or if you just are having a crazy time pulling out your hair and trying to just force yourself to stick one way. And having that, I think it's like it's much easier on the again physical, mental, emotional than pulling your hair out and then all of a sudden going down the street to the fast food joint. Which, being a coach for 16 years, I've coached a lot of people who they would stick to it at any cost and swear up and down, "I will never eat anything else. This is the only thing that makes sense. This is it. I would rather die." And then all of a sudden, when the crap hits the fan, they find themselves at like a meat buffet, and it's like if they would have had a little bit more softness and acceptance and the wider picture that not all cooked food is the same and it's not evil and doesn't make you bad, they might have had a little bit of an easier time and not gone from this extreme to that extreme. And I don't even really consider all raw extreme, but when you consider them at polar opposites of the sides, then that's kind of where that plays into the picture.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree 100%. And especially that aspect that you mentioned with the mental health. I feel so ambivalent. I feel like it's so ambivalent because, on the one side, I feel like raw food, or just generally, the better I eat, the better I feel mentally and emotionally, because what we
Mhm,
eat, like food equals mood. And
mhm,
the more high vibe foods I put into my body, the better, the more high vibe I feel as well. And
yeah,
then on the other hand, cooked foods or a little bit more stimulating foods can sometimes take the edge off a little bit. So
mhm,
when you feel like a lot of intense and heavy emotions coming up, you can kind of put a lid on it. It's questionable how like optimal that is long term, but at least
mhm,
if in a moment it is just too intense for you to deal with, and as you mentioned, you don't have those coping mechanisms yet,
mhm,
then it can sometimes be really, really helpful. So I was curious, what if you had a client and that client would say, "Hey, I would like to incorporate some, cooked foods for dinner, maybe." What would be some foods that you would say, again, not so black and white, cooked food is poison, but what would be some
yeah.
foods that you would say, like, is something that someone could incorporate into their meal plan and still experiencing all these amazing benefits from changing their diets?
Yeah, that's a great question. I generally like to get people to make A tier list and B tier list foods, so like the A tier list may be like all fruits and vegetables, and the B tier list may be actually like higher fat foods and some lightly steamed vegetables or greens, I'd put those there. And then you might have C tier list foods, which are like, the red lights, which are fast foods and stuff that you really would rather completely keep off 100%, Um, so I would say to me, the most ideal cooked foods would be steamed fruit or greens or vegetables, tubers, squashes, which are still botanically fruit as well. So all those kinds of things, having those as an option, not necessarily as the first call, but as a backup plan if they feel like that's going to be beneficial for them, then that can really help people instead of going all the way to the red tier list foods.
Mm. Thank you for sharing. And what would be an advice that you would give someone who really finds themselves still in that black and white thinking, really beating themselves up and being more in that mentality of, okay, it's either McDonald's or fully raw. So what would you kind of tell them?
Oh gosh, it's going to depend on the individual because you want to get to know them where they're at a little bit, a bit of their history and story because you know there's gray everywhere, right? And it is tough because some people it comes from a traumatic past with their upbringing, or other people it may just come from a lack of information, and other people it may come from a sense of identity of self and that they just can't imagine anything else, so it's going to kind of depend on each situation and each person. Um, but in general, I would ask people just to step back a little bit and look at what they believe and why they believe it, and if it's actually true, and like if they believe that raw means they're good and cooked means they're bad, well, to question that, like does that mean everyone around you that's eating cooked food they're bad people? They're worse than you. You're higher than them, and you're more holy or special. Like is that true? And is that the world that you want to live in and create? I don't know, getting deeper into the psychology of beliefs and if it's actually helpful or if it's hindering them. So it's kind of individual to some degree, but it's just kind of a deeper introspective look into it.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing. And there was some points that you mentioned in the book as well. So something that I've heard a lot even before reading the book is the digestive glycosis. So basically that
Mhm.
whenever you eat cooked food, then you get an immune reaction where your body is just gonna be like, no. And as you mentioned, you're gonna get mucoid plaque and all that stuff.
Yes.
So what do you have to say about that?
I apologize. I started to read the comments and I missed the very start of what you said, but I know you mentioned about the leucodo I can't pronounce that well, the leukodosis, and yeah, so could you just clarify the question? I apologize.
Yeah, of course. That's completely all right. Yeah. So, what do you have to say about people saying that whenever you get eat cooked food, you get an immune response, the digestive leukosis,
Yeah, it's a hard
whatever
word.
it's called.
Leukodosis or something. You know, I mean, for the first part, it's tough. It's a common reality that people just read one or two books from the 80s and then take it as gospel truth that it has, infallible and has never, there's never been new information come out. And even then, though, it's kind of interesting because, you know, the original person who came up with that term and did those experiments, he didn't say that all cooked foods created that situation, but then raw foodists took that information and cherry picked it and made it seem as if it meant all cooked foods do that. But it just simply isn't the truth, So it's just poor information that has been cherry picked and then repeated again and again and again, which is more common nowadays than ever with the advent of social media and influencers and stuff like that, right? So it's just a sad reality that the original information even says that there isn't, that isn't present in all cooked foods. It's more really prevalent with like processed and charred and heavily cooked, high temperature heated foods. When we're talking about wet heat and plants, wet heat with plants, so whether it's steaming or boiling, that doesn't happen. And there is even a little bit in the original study showing that if you mix some of those other foods that do cause that reaction with raw foods, then that reaction doesn't happen either, right? So it's it's just an unfortunate thing these days that often information is cherry picked without really looking in depth at it and then just parroted over and over and over for decades. Like some of these things like mucoid plaque, for example, like I've talked to Dr. Graham about that for a long time, and like he knew in the 90s that that was complete garbage, and it was debunked around a lot of different circles, but still people repeated it, and people still repeat it now, like 40 years later, when it's complete garbage information. So it's just an unfortunate reality about how people receive and put out information in some time in some situations and cases.
Yeah, it's so true. And I really want to say at this point also that I'm so grateful that you're bringing so much clarity into the raw food movement and also reading your book. Of course, because I've been following you for some while, I already knew some of the information in it, but it is really the book that I wish I had a few years ago because I think, especially when you first come into this lifestyle, there are so many like black and white thoughts and black and white
Yeah.
opinions that can really confuse you. And I also remember for myself that when I first got into it, it was very much black and white, where I was like, okay, I need to stick to all these rules, intermittent fasting and doing fasting so that I can get rid of all that gunk, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
also that cooked food myth. So I'm so grateful that you're bringing so much clarity to the table with this book. And yeah, I also want to mention at this point that for everyone who's interested in getting Chris's book and also my book and more than 30 other amazing resources, then you can click the link in the show notes, or you can go to Chris's or my bio. We also have it in there. And I see we also have a few questions. Someone asks, what about raw squash? So, what are your thoughts about raw squash, Chris?
Yeah, and that kind of brings up a fun topic. There's two ways I'll go at that. I'll first say like certain types of raw squash are easily digestible and pretty dang tasty. I mean, cucumbers to melons to zucchinis, they're technically all squashes. It's just the melon is a little bit more melon than squash, but botanically they're very, very similar. It's just with the more hardy squashes, they're more complex carbohydrate or starch, and that interestingly starts sweeter and then sets as it gets older, whereas fruit starts kind of more set and then gets sweeter as it gets ripe. So it's a little bit different there, but they are botanically fruits. And among the veggies, they can be among the easiest to digest, especially cooked, to be honest. But different raw squashes definitely can be eaten raw. Or sorry, that sounds funny. Different squashes definitely can be eaten raw. Of course, though, zucchini is going to be easier, lighter, juicier to digest than, say, Hubbard squash or something like that. Young, fresh pumpkins and stuff like that can be pretty decent and easy to digest. I know some people that actually really enjoy squashes like butternut or, I've had raw pumpkin on occasion. It's pretty decent. Or what are some other ones? Even different kind of heartier starches, like, say, sweet potatoes. Some people I know enjoy them raw. I personally don't love those, but that doesn't mean that they're bad or that you shouldn't have them. I think it comes up to the individual. Try them out. If you enjoy them, that's great. To me, there are some foods like that that truthfully are probably better cooked if you're going to have them in any large amount, like a little bit of something here or there, whatever. But if you want to be eating, you know, a kilo of sweet potato a day, you're probably better to steam it or boil it, rather than to just munch on it like this. But to each their own. They are still edible. They still have a lot of nutrition. It's just harder for your body to process raw starch compared to when it gets more water rich and caramelized with the wet heat.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with what you said that if I had a choice between raw sweet potato and steamed one, I would definitely go for steamed one because then it's actually sweet and represents what we're looking for, like the sweet stuff.
Mm.
So I think it's so important to focus also on the enjoyable, pleasurable experience when we're eating and not just raw slow. Okay, if I
Yeah.
can eat squash raw, then I'd rather do that.
No, I totally agree. And then that actually brings me to the second part that I wanted to say is like to some people, like it's raw is law, and as long as it's raw, it's good, and again, they'll go to any lengths just to maintain just that for that sake, like to me, I'm not a raw foodist to be a raw foodist. I'm a raw foodist to be happy, healthy, and to feel my best. And for the absolute most part, like I said, 99.9% of the time, that means I'm eating 100% raw foods close to their natural state or in recipes that I digest well and I really enjoy. Um, but for that example with sweet potatoes or squash, like to me, it's just like they're probably going to be easier to digest, tastier, and you may even get more out of them if you cook them. So it's I just personally wouldn't put that on an A tier list of raw choices. They may be on a B tier list of raw choices, but they also would probably be behind them as a B tier list of steamed. So um, but it's all individual. It's just like what do you enjoy, and I encourage people to run experiments and try to let go of any negative thoughts, judgments, emotions around them, if they genuinely want to, it's like if you have something pulling you towards trying something, but you say, "No, no, no, that's bad, deny, deny, deny," one day when you feel crap and you feel bad, you'll match that frequency and be like, "Well, screw it, I'm already bad, so I'm gonna try this bad thing," and then you're gonna feel twice as bad because 'cause you're doubling the bad, right? Whereas instead, if you look at those foods as, "Hey, those are options. They're not my first tier option, but they're still there," well, you're much less likely to be rolling down the hill towards them because you might be having a hard time and go, yeah, those are on the table if I want, and if not, I'll choose this. And even if you do choose it, you're not going to be doubling down the bad because you haven't labeled them as a failure or toxic or a huge stress mentally, emotionally having them.
Hmm. Yeah, I think our perception of how we feel about certain things plays such an important role as well in making those food choices.
Hmm.
And I think the ultimate for me will always be that I enjoy my food, that when I sit down, I feel like a queen because I have a feast that just excites me. And
Yeah.
then everything else, like, of course, I also want to eat something that makes me feel good afterwards, not just while I'm eating it. And that's why I do choose the nuances of focusing on a lot of fruit. And I see we also have a lot of comments here, and someone is asking, how is cooked food bad? We gotta be trolling. So maybe you have something to say about that because obviously cooked
Yeah.
food, it's not that black and white, but we
Yeah.
also need to still, I think, acknowledge that I would say if there was a spectrum of which foods are most optimal and which are not so optimal, then for me personally, I still also, same as you, feel my most energized, my most happy and vibrant when I do focus on the raw food, and that
Mhm.
really makes up the huge percentage of what I put into my body. So, what would you
Yeah.
say to that person who's maybe not that sure yet about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, it's all relative, right? It's like relative to what? Like, firstly, comparing fruit to steamed broccoli to deep fried chicken nuggets, like this is completely different. It's a totally different spectrum. And then relative to what? To convenience, to price, to health, like again, it's relative in all these different ways. So like if we're talking about optimal digestion and nutrition, well, yeah, then raw foods are just going to work the best, especially easy to digest ones like fruits and tender greens. But if you really want to get into it specifically about health, well, steamed foods and boiled foods are very different than high temperature baked or fried or grilled foods, and then like plant foods are going to be different than most animal products, and so and the higher the heat, the longer the duration, the more toxins that are formed. And indeed, there are toxins formed. We got acrylamide with cooked carbohydrates when they brown, and this is a known carcinogen. It causes cancer. So I'm sorry, but like browned potatoes in the oven, while I don't think it's gonna have if you do it once or twice, it's not gonna like you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, now I have cancer. But they are known carcinogens that take a demand on your bodily reserves of antioxidants, and those are then not going to other bodily processes, and done in excess has been shown to cause issue. And then charred meats, you get a whole host of other carcinogens, and different types of foods and different types of cooking methods produce different toxic compounds. And if health is your goal, if reducing the burden on your body is your goal, if reducing your chances of degenerative disease is your goal, well, then in that context, you could say that temperature heated foods, plant or animal origin, are bad for that goal. I don't label them intrinsically as bad, meaning that you're bad for having them, but in terms of your specific goals, if they align up with what I just mentioned, they're not the best choices.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you had a few slip ups. Obviously, I think I don't know anyone who hasn't had a few slip ups over the time. So, what were like the immediate physical changes that you have noticed when you were consistently doing the raw thing, and then all of a sudden you maybe went back to some old time favorite foods? What
Mhm.
were some immediate responses that your body gave you from choosing that?
Wow. Well, I mean, it depends how far back we want to go. Because I'll just say, like, in kind of a nutshell, like in my first 5 years raw, I really fell off 3 times. And the first was, well, I guess technically four. I mean, the
Like,
first was
really? Only I have to only 4 times?
in small groups, like we'll say like 2 days at a time for the
Wow.
second or third one. And I could, if I rewind, I can go into it easier. In my first month raw, I was like, I'm gonna go raw for a month, and that was the goal. Just like I was like, I just want to do 1 month. And halfway through, I had a handful of granola, and I was like, why did I even have that? That was gross compared to what I'm eating. I don't feel as good. Like gross. So that was what I would call like a fall off. But then at the end of that month, I was like, I can have whatever I want. I want to try some of my old favorite foods. I don't really consider that falling off because I genuinely chose that. It was like, and there wasn't actually shame or guilt around it because I wasn't from that mindset yet that 100% raw for life. It was just like, this makes sense. I'm trying this out for a month and let's see how it is. And then I had like vegan Subway, vegan pizza, vegan Indian buffet, and I felt crap. It was like 2 or 3 days that I tried those things, and I was like, I felt slowed down. I puffed up a little bit. I felt less mental clarity. I felt like all I wanted to do is eat, whereas that previous month I wanted to run around and skateboard and have a whole bunch of fun. So I was like, I'm back on it. So I stuck on it, and I stayed on it for about 8 months until I really fell off again. And it was really interesting because then after falling off, it was only again that if I remember right, because that's again 21 years ago, it was like 1 or 2 days max that I did. It was like 1 or 2 major meals. And then it took like double that time, like 16 months before I fell off again. And then after that, it was like another like couple years until I fell off. So that's how for me it was in that first 5 years, it was like three really major falls off, but I guess technically four if you consider the choice to be falling off. But some of those were really fell off, like because I was vegetarian for a few years before I went raw vegan, and I was vegan for 6 months before I went raw vegan. But on two of those occasions, I fell off to animal products, and one of them was I fractured my back, and I fractured my back skateboarding, and I genuinely thought my life was over. Like I was like, because like for a month, all I did was eat fruit and smoke weed. And that was my painkiller at that time. And I was hunched over, my back hurt, and I thought like I'm never going to be able to do what I love. Like I felt like I was here on the planet to skateboard. I went raw in part so I could skateboard more, and I was so depressed. And that's kind of part of what happened too. When I'd choose something, I'd feel depressed. But I was so depressed and like thing, and I ordered a street corner far away from where I lived so that no one would see me, and I ate it on the street corner kind of hiding by myself. And that was like what I would consider probably my deepest shame, kind of guilt, falling off kind of thing. Yeah, but that was actually the second time though. The first time I was on a road trip with a bunch of friends, and I had like $2 to my budget per day for food. We went to California, and they're all friends I used to drink and smoke and eat fast food with all the time, but I hadn't seen them for a couple of years because I was living in Vancouver and they lived in Alberta. And they just kind of passed through. I'm like, I want to come with you 2 weeks to California on a skate trip. And they're all drinking, smoking, partying the whole time and eating McDonald's every day. And I have $2 a day budget. And I'm like, I'd never traveled as a raw foodist. This was the first real fall off the wagon. And and they brought me to a grocery store once every 2 or 3 days, but they didn't really want to make time for that because they were just busy going to skate spots and going to fast food basically, and buying beer. And within a couple days, like there was no ripe bananas. I didn't know how to do it. I'd never traveled raw. I had no money, so I was like trying to eat raisins and drink water. And long story short, I was also already at a really low body weight because I didn't understand caloric density, and I was just like falling apart. And all of a sudden, my joints started hurting again, which they had improved in the first like 8+ months of doing the raw food kind of stuff. And I fell apart, and I was starting to go mentally crazy. Like I was just feeling like neurotic and crazy and starting to get depressed again. And one night I snuck off from where they were and I ate a Snickers bar. And then I was like, "You're a loser. You're a failure." Because just days before that, I was telling him like, "This is the best. I feel so amazing. I'm raw for life, no matter what." Just really over the top with it, like almost a raw evangelist. And then all of a sudden I sneak off, have that, and I'm the biggest failure I've ever been, and every dream I've ever had is gone in my mind again. It's not reality, but that's what I thought. So then I went to a fast food restaurant and had what was it? I think it was chili cheeseburger and chili cheese fries, and I hit that one for both of those 2 that I just shared. I hid those for years because I was so embarrassed and I thought I was such a loser and failure. How could I turn my back? But I mean, at that point, I didn't love myself and I wasn't positive about life, and I thought I'd rather kind of die. Like I kind of went back to that modality and or thought pattern. And I mean, that's where I came from. You know, that's why I got into health 5 years previous, was because I was mildly suicidal and I wasn't really happy about life. And um, you know, so that's these are the things I kind of want to help prevent other people to go through, because it was way harder on my physical, mental, emotional self to put that hate and guilt and self-loathing on myself. You know, and if I would have maybe been a little bit softer, you know, it wouldn't have went from that side completely to the other side, you know, and I've just experienced that with other people as well as through coaching people who have been softer on themselves, have a more streamlined, easier route with less, you know, guilt and hiding and closet shameful binges, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, 100%. And I've been in similar situations probably way more often than you, so I can really relate.
Mm.
So, if you could rewind and travel back in time to that younger Chris that was just eating a Snickers bar, what would maybe be something that you would tell him to help him, pick himself up again? And maybe what would be a more like a choice that maybe would serve him a little bit better? Do you think it would have maybe been easier if he had gone for some cooked foods, but maybe not something as extreme where you just feel like it sucks you into the other extreme, but being
Mhm.
more like in the middle of those two? Yeah.
Well, I would think yes overall. You know, it is funny though, because like both were really extreme situations. You know, they're quite extreme, like the fractured back, and you know, traveling with friends. You know, and never having been in that social, emotional, financial situation, or even just physical situation, because I'd never traveled as a raw foodist. You know, so like I don't know if that would have helped a ton in those situations, but just overall, I think having that softer view and that more relaxed kind of bigger picture view of it, and some of the nuance of, you know, what we talk about and what I go over in my book about not making things as black and white, I think it would have made it smoother. I don't actually even know though if it would have led me to eating any of it, you know, truthfully, because like I said, I didn't have a lot of major falls off the wagon. And later on, you know, when I first started my website, I had my next one, which I would have considered a choice, because I actually made a meditation of it. I made a whole blog post about it and stuff like that, you know. So, and anything since then has been a choice, you know. Um, so I don't know if it would have made a huge difference in actually what I did, but it definitely would have made it a lot easier on myself. Like I would have been easier on myself, and I maybe wouldn't have chosen those things. But again, because it was revolving around you know, those specific circumstances, I can't genuinely say if I wouldn't have still chose those things and felt pretty guilty about it, because you know, for me still, you know, like not choosing anything outside of vegan foods is like a that's for me like the beyond red light. That's not something I'm willing to do. It would basically take a life or death situation, and even then, you know, like I don't know for sure, you know. So it's like, you know, like it's easy to say like nope, never, no matter what. But like when you fracture your back and you think your life's over, it can be a little different situation, you know. So, but all in all, anyway, I would definitely say to myself to be more compassionate, you know, more easy on myself. That raw doesn't make you holier or better. It doesn't make you worse to have cooked food. It's just a choice, and there are consequences to those, you know. And you can either make it harder on yourself or easier on yourself with your perspective on that, you know. So, and maybe I would have given myself a little bit of money, so when I went on that, trip to California, I didn't try and starve myself on $2 a day for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think that's such a key point as well, like stepping into an abundance mentality, of course,
Mhm.
financially, but just in all areas, because I generally feel like if you're in a lack mentality and you're approaching this kind of lifestyle from a place of I'm not enough yet, I need to
Yeah.
fill that void, I need to get acknowledgement maybe from the raw food community or from the
Yeah.
health community or even from my family. Or see, I'm doing something new, something great. if we're approaching it from that point, then it is always going to be difficult to stick with it because the why is not from a positive place of love and
Mhm.
abundance and
Yeah.
like there's more than enough in
Yeah.
whether that's financially to be able to buy all this delicious food or whether that's actually of eating enough or whether that's actually of having an abundance in that spectrum of different things that we can eat and not just apples, greens, and bananas, but there's
Yeah.
just so many different like you could eat a different fruit for the rest of your life and you still wouldn't have tried all the different fruits out there.
Yeah.
And yeah, really looking at it from that perspective.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, so much of it really comes down to your mindset about it, and your whys are absolutely huge, and again, that's actually really, really true for me because while definitely the more I got into raw food, I gathered whys, and I grew my why list. In the beginning, besides obviously my connection to the animals and stuff like that, which I really loved, my biggest, strongest reason for doing it was athletics for skateboarding. I just wanted to heal faster for skateboarding. So, when I hurt my back and I thought maybe I'll never have skateboarding again, well, what was I left with? Nothing,
Mhm.
But if instead there was a lot of other reasons tied to why I was doing this, it makes it so much easier to stick to, and then again, if I'm my why is like raw. It's like I'm raw for skateboarding, so it's like that completely took out everything else. But if instead my goal is I want to be as healthy and happy and vibrant as I possibly can, and raw food helps me do that, but this is my secondary foods that still work along those lines, again, that's a little bit softer than just like boop, boop, black, white, this is
Mhm.
it. And this is success, this is failure.
Yeah, yeah, that was beautifully said to kind of hit it from different angles so that you have, again, more abundance in your reasons and in your whys and not just that one thing where if you lose that, then you're not left with anything. Yeah, I like that. And I think, I mean, I of course don't know, but it seems like that's maybe also why you've been able to stick with it for so long and, had so few slip ups because you had such a strong why with the skateboarding. And I
Yeah.
think that is really, really important that we have something that really excites us and that makes us get up joyful in the morning, and then it's easier to take action.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was like so freaking strong for me that I was able to pull that elastic band really freaking far back until it snapped, you know?
Mhm.
I had a lot of willpower, but also, I mean, I know you've experienced as well, like when things are going good, like when you're focused on abundance and you're enjoying it and you're getting good quality food, willpower kind of goes out the door. You don't really need it as much. You enjoy it. It feels the absolute best. So, in those first 5 years, like for the most part, that's how I felt. It's just when the crap really hit the fan and the elastic went really far back and a couple factors came into play of, under eating and all these things, it was like, no, there's I can't, no amount of willpower will beat this, it's like neuroticism and, mental anguish, so it, it can be so helpful, but going by willpower alone is a recipe for disaster. It really is, and that's why having those whys, having some support, having good information, and again, like we said, like making it really clear to yourself that this is a journey and it's not a success failure in any one moment. It's about going in a direction and having the tools and resources, support, and planning to make it easier for yourself to succeed in the long term.
Mhm. Wow, that was such a like aha moment for me right now because it's so true. Like the your why, like why you do it, is really for the moments where things aren't going that well, and you're kind of on a low to pick you back up to the baseline. But the baseline is always like effortless. Like
Mhm.
this is the effortless path. Like I said that to one of my clients once, and that was also such an aha moment for her that like this is the effortless path, like putting less strain on the digestive system so that we have energy freed up to go and live our lives, to get things done, to get us to our goals, and to become also more in touch with who we truly are beyond that form that we're in. So I think it's always helpful to get us back into that baseline
Yeah.
and from there, the energy is generated effortlessly to do all these things.
Absolutely. And we got Happy Raw Rennie, who has her book in the actually mini course in the
Yeah.
bundle called Effortlessly Raw, which I'm sure goes a bunch
Mhm.
into all that goodness there too, you know?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. So yeah, for everyone who's watching, you can still get the bundle for almost another week. So take advantage of that now. And Chris has this amazing book and the raw truth that I definitely wish I had back in the days. And you also have a book about weight loss, slimming
Mhm.
secrets, where I also share how to effortlessly get and maintain a lean body. And I thought we could also have some space for questions. If anyone
Of
has
course.
any questions, then
Mhm.
we drop them in the comments down below. I already saw one, and that is blood sugar. Fruit causes blood sugar problems by Michael. And he says, if I eat fruit, my blood sugar rises. Is there any way to enjoy them without major spikes? What do you
Yeah,
have to say
that's
about
a great question. You know, very truthfully, fruit is great for stable blood sugar compared to most other foods, including even like high protein foods or cooked carbohydrates and stuff like that. Especially in the context of a low fat diet. You know, that's the main thing is if you have insulin resistance from having a high fat diet for a prolonged period of time, or because you have a lot of excess body weight, or even a moderate amount of excess body weight, um, or even if you're really underslept, you know, all
that?
those things can lead to having higher fluctuations and bigger spikes when you eat higher carbohydrate foods and simple carbohydrate foods. So the ticket there is to eat a lower fat diet in general, less than 15% of your total calories coming from fat. To be well hydrated, that actually also makes a big difference. To get some exercise, and you know, under those conditions, you can eat as much fruit as you want essentially, and actually come to a better baseline. You know, some people also, though, I've seen online people freaking out like I'm at like 90 millimeter or millimoles. I can't remember like my blood sugar's at 90, like I'm way too high. And it's like, no, like the fluctuations are bigger than that. It's just you don't want them elevated for prolonged periods of time. It's natural to have a bit of a spike and then come
Mm,
down in a natural way. And you know, if you're really curious about this too, I'd recommend checking out people like Mastering Diabetes by Dr. Cyrus Kabata and Robbie Barbero, where they go really hugely into the science on how you can actually reverse diabetes and blood sugar metabolic issues through a high carbohydrate, either cooked carbohydrate or fruit-based carbohydrate diet. And I mean, the simple answer to that though is, again, it's like keeping it low fat, you know, including greens, chewing well, and all the other stuff I mentioned: sleep, hydration, and exercise. All those things sharpen insulin sensitivity. And then you get all the benefits of fruit without any potential drawbacks, which aren't caused by fruit. It's because your body's bunged up by excess dietary fat or insulin resistance in the muscles.
mm. Thank you for answering that. And yeah, it has made such a huge difference. I'm so grateful I met Dr. Graham
Yeah.
and really simplified things and shared about, lowering the fat. That makes such a difference. And I can always feel whenever I had a little bit much fat the night before, when I eat the fruit the next day and I haven't exercised or hydrated that well before, then I can definitely feel it right away. So I always try and make sure of these factors. It makes such a difference. Yeah.
Yeah, it even really vastly changes how much you desire and enjoy sweet fruit. You know, it's like
Yeah.
if somebody is habitually eating a high fat diet, they're also typically the one that you say like, "Oh, I love bananas." Like, "How many do you have?" Like, "Oh, I eat like 12." They're like, "Oh my god, if I eat half a banana, I get like dizzy, and that seems like way too much sweet." I'm a salty person. It's not that they're actually a salty person or that they can't tolerate fruit. You know, it's just that they're eating so much fat that their insulin response is poor. You know, it's just a physiological fact. And every single time I see someone who says that, if they switch it up and go low fat for even a week or two, all of a sudden their appreciation and their desire and ability to eat larger quantities of carbohydrate just skyrockets.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. And yeah, exercise and sleep also so important for blood sugar, like and
Yeah.
just being able to actually enjoy bigger fruit meals. And Super Intelligence Diet writes, I'm doing Julia's diet, no fats, no salt. I will mention right away though that's not my diet. I do eat
Mm,
fats too, just
yeah.
low fat, and yeah, I do avoid the salt as much as I can. Or not avoid, but I just do my best with salt free. But
Mhm.
cannot seem to eat much, but also seems to be enough to feel fine.
Mm. It's so hard to really, like, individually comment on in someone. I mean, first, I don't even know what Julia's diet is, unless are we talking about your diet? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess it's
I
how I promote like my what I
yeah.
eat in a day videos.
Yeah, yeah, so, I mean, but it's, without, more details and really going into it, it's hard to do much more than comment, but, we can definitely say that for the long term, getting adequate calories and a variety of food, and that includes an abundance of fruit and lots of leafy greens, is the way for stability and long-term success. We can only, again, pull that elastic back too far, whether that's from, stress or whether that's not eating enough, and eventually we're gonna hit a wall, so yeah, it's easier to talk one on one about individual issues and bring more clarity there than this kind of format.
Yeah, for sure. And Chris and I were always here to answer questions also in the DMs on Instagram or if you send us an email. So, yeah, I think, as you say, it's always a little bit hard to find out too much information from comments like that.
Yeah,
But
from one little comment. Yeah, for sure, for
But
sure.
yeah, if you have any broader questions, then definitely feel free to drop them. And otherwise, I'll mention one more time that in Chris's bio and in my bio, you can find the Ultimate Raw Vegan Bundle to get our books and so many more. And yeah, I'm so excited to be part of this. Thanks again for also putting it together and for so much work that you put into the bundles every year. I'm really, really grateful. And
Pleasure for sure. Pleasure for sure. It's such a blessing to see everyone come together, and it's a highlight of the year for sure. To
yeah.
get the whole crew together and the ever expanding family, and to be that little bit of a spark to get us all to, including myself, to create more, right? Because we all have so many experiences and unique perspectives and strengths and skills to come together with to make this easier for everyone else out there.
Yeah, I fully agree. Like, I feel like we all have so many gifts to give from the experience that we have had, and it's always nice to come together and bring those gifts out together.
Mhm.
And yeah, without the bundles, I wouldn't have created all the courses and books that I've created in the last years. So I'm always grateful that I have something to look forward to that motivates me to get into creation mode. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I see just one in asking a crazy question about ganja, about the devil's weed. And I'm guessing they're asking me because I mentioned it before. It's been my painkiller of choice in major accidents and sometimes major emotional turmoil in my life. But yeah, since I was a teenager, occasionally, and when I was in a car accident and fractured my back, as I mentioned, that's I'd rather have that than pharmaceuticals. And truthfully, for me, it actually works better, but I wouldn't say I'm a casual user of that. Who knows? Maybe one day when I retire and my joints don't work anymore, maybe I'll become Rasta. But that's not what I promote for health or do as a regular.
Mhm. Yeah, I guess it's similar than cooked food for some people. Maybe in more in a physical area, it can take the edge off in the moment.
For sure.
I feel like it maybe gets a little bit too much.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
And I know some people who, for example, in social circumstances, if they're out at a party or if they're at a cruise or an event or something like that, they find it mentally, socially easier to have that flexibility if they desire it. I've been in a different place in my mind where I've been like, you know what, if if I were to do that, it'd actually make it harder on me because then they'd expect more, and it just, it'd also just leave me feeling less good and feel like a bit of a roller coaster. So a lot of this really depends where we're at, and I think the important thing though is just to, let go of the demonization and the misrepresentation and inaccurate information, and to go deeper into ourselves, why we feel these things, why we believe these things, and if they're true again. And again, to honor oneself, because I really think that if there is something you want to experience but you deny it, it's going to again be pulling that elastic back, and you're much more likely to have it hit you in the face rather than to, like, take it for an embrace and decide if that suits you or not, because the more guilt and shame we feel around something, the less likely we're going to be present with it. We're going to do it from a place of hiding and quick, like negative energy. And we're more likely then to continue and repeat that again and again and again. But if you're able to slow
Mm.
down and see it for what it is and truly experience it, if you're called to it, you're much less likely to be in that repetitive cycle where you go, I don't know why I keep on doing this. I don't want to do this, you know?
Yeah, I 100% agree. And for me, it's also been so helpful to take away the judgment
Mm,
around doing something that's maybe not as optimal for my health and to allow myself to do it. And through that experience and through maybe also the consequences that brought to me, but in acceptance and also accepting all the consequences fully, then choosing out of love to do something else that serves me much better. So I think,
mm.
yeah, taking away the judgment is so important.
Huge. Having that perspective, I just want to say really quickly, because I often say this to people. It's like, where else will you where you find people that actually feel guilt and shame around having something like steamed broccoli, where that's their junk food that they feel bad about having? And they're like, exactly, like, are you serious? Like, that's your junk, like, that's the bad food? Like, take it easy on yourself, like, that's better, that's healthier food than what 99% of the people on the planet eat, um, in an average day, so it's like having a bit more wide perspective on it, while at the same time, like, have your goals, like, have clarity on what you want and what gets you there, but having a little bit more softness around the road towards that goal, I think, can be very beneficial for people.
Yeah, and also being courageous to find like your own sweet spot, your own path, like
Yeah.
whether that is fully raw or high raw or even whole
Oh,
food plant-based. And to also acknowledge we're all here on the same path, like wanting to improve our health. And it's totally fine that we have different nuances. Someone likes their celery juice in the morning, someone likes their banana smoothie, someone likes their watermelon, whatever it is that brings joy to your heart, do it. And
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, do it until it doesn't, right? It's like
Mhm.
life's a dance and the only constant is change, and being more accepting of that and more clear on, what you want, where you want to go and what's getting you there, and then open to experimentation and life's processes. The more clear we can be with that, the easier the road's going to be and the less sharp the dance is going to be. It's going to be, going with the waves instead of going with like ding, ding, ding.
Funny. And we have one more question from Super Intelligence Diet. First of all, thanks for the compliment about the rock stars or raw stars.
Mm.
Um, why do you think B12 tanked when many other raw foodists are fine without supplementing any ideas? Do you take Algia or anything that may actually get the book definitely because in there's a whole chapter about B12.
Yeah, there is a lot in there. I mean, the short thing I'll say is I actually know very few long-term raw vegans that don't supplement B12, like less than a handful. And B12 deficiency can take anywhere from like a couple of years up to 10 years to develop, depending upon your baseline before you get into it, and exactly what your diet is. Because if you include any kind of processed food, like let's say somebody still includes some plant-based milk or nutritional yeast or things like that. Well, then you're still getting B12, although those are still supplemental forms. Like any B12 you see in any processed food or a nutritional yeast is a supplemental B12. And algaes, they actually, for the absolute most part, contain analog B12, which actually hinders absorption. So it actually makes the issue worse rather than making it better. So I think that's just not really an accurate statement. It's quite rare, and you know there are slight genetic differences in people, or there could be differences in terms of, their living situations, and if they're out in the garden a whole bunch. But that said, like Julia said, like in my chapter, I talk about I know people who've been doing this for 30, 40 years, and some of them who basically live like in a fruit forest on their own land in a tropical setting, barefoot in their garden, and thought like, I don't need to supplement because that's what the hygienist said, or because I shouldn't, and it's pure to not supplement. Who actually now they have really unsteady walking, their hands shake, and they don't feel quite as sharp because they came became so clinically deficient, but still denied it, and they felt the numbness crawl up their fingers towards their hands, and they denied it until it was too late, and they had irreversible neurological issues, you know? So, um, nerve issues and neurological issues, you know? So it's something that I think is just important to bring up and to, again, kind of the same thing, to not make it black and white, success or failure, or that it's bad to have to supplement, you know, to be softer with these things and a realist rather than be attached to philosophy and ideals, and to, you know, get tested every once in a while. And if you have some symptoms, not to worry about, or not to just ignore them, you know. I've
Mm.
I've heard some people, I'll say this, I've heard some people say if you have any onion or any garlic, well, then you disrupt everything and you can't get B12. But then I press them on the information around that and they have none. You know, they just say, that's what it is, you know, and it's like, well, give us the information, you know, like there is no good information saying that. Um, and I have said it sometimes, like if having those foods meant that I needed to supplement, I'd probably rather supplement and still enjoy those in my diet on occasion. But I don't believe that's the case. My first 5 years, which I was steadily going down in my B12, I didn't consume any of those foods at all. You know, so yeah, but I do
Interesting.
go deeper in the chapter.
Yeah. But interesting. I never heard that about the onion and the garlic. That's completely new.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to some old information, which I go a little bit into, but I haven't as much as like, you know, in older kind of hygienic texts, it just basically makes things like garlic or onion like 100% bad. Like there can't be any good about them, and like they're just toxic. And you know, yeah, I've even had people say like they're antibiotics. Like, you know, you want, you know, you want the probiotics in your body, you know, you want or not the probiotics, the microbiome to flourish. Like if you flood it with antibiotics, you're just killing everything off. And how can it know the difference between good bacteria and bad bacteria? It just kills everything. But we now know that it actually contains prebiotic fibers and it does selectively target more pathogenic bacteria. So like garlic does kill off more bad, some good, but it also does feed certain good strains you want. So it can be beneficial if someone, let's say, is really imbalanced and, you know, feels sick. The old wives' tale: you feel sick, we'll have some garlic. Well, it kills off some of the other and helps you come back to balance. And even in saying that, I'm not saying that's better than, you know, just taking a break and drinking water and resting and drinking fresh fruit juices, which also replenish the good and bring more balance. But it's not quite as black and white as old literature that is really like, you know, all cooked food is toxic and, you know, godly demon, you know, in terms of all these different things. And to me, it's just a pity that some of the best information out there, I love it. I love the old classics, and I hold them up as like really great information. But a lot of it is violent black and white language that I think can make things way harder for people and create like a strict black and white kind of good bad tendency in their mind, which obviously they lived through. Otherwise, they wouldn't be putting that information out in that way. You know?
Yeah, maybe it's just a little outdated, but
Yeah.
that's why we're here with
Yeah.
our new message. And I want to thank you so much for coming on, Chris. And I also want to say about the B12 that I'm really, really grateful that I started supplementing. And yeah, it really helped me a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, so thank you everyone for watching. And I have one last question. I always like to round off my interviews. So if you could travel back in time to the older Chris who just got started with raw food, what is one advice, if you could meet him again, that you would tell him?
Oh gosh. You know, it's kind of funny because like, you know, like the very classic kinds of things, you know, just like be softer on yourself and like enjoy the whole process, you know, like that'd probably be it. But also like without trying to sound too like spiritual on it, it's like all of those things that happened brought me here and I feel really blessed to be here. So like
Mhm.
I'd almost hesitate to say anything, you know, but you just never know what those ramifications would be, you know. So if I was to say something, it'd just be like, you know, take it a little bit easier on yourself. This is an amazing journey ahead, and the more, you know, more relaxed you can be about it, probably the easier it's going to be. But then maybe I wouldn't come out with this book, and you know, life would be totally different. And who knows? I'm stoked to be here. So
Mm. Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. And yeah, thank you for everything you bring into the world, for all the service you give to people through these lives, through your books, through your recipes. And yeah, thank you.
Reciprocated right back at you. Thanks for the fun topic. It's a pretty intense one, and there can be a lot of judgment out there around it. And that's why we're bringing it up, because if hearing this information brings up judgment in you towards us or towards this message, it's very likely that this is going to be really helpful information for you to try and actualize and go into yourself with, because it could make life a lot easier and a lot less harsh.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And
Such a
thank you
pleasure.
everyone for watching and all your comments. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.